Road trips have their appeal, but be wary on your travels, as you never know what's waiting for you on those open roads. It's time to get comfortable, strap in your seatbelt, and let the darkness take control. Number 1. I hunt deer in northern Wisconsin with my dad and uncle and family friends. When I was in high school, I acted in the school plays, and the weekend of our performances was always the same as opening weekends for deer season. My last performance would be Saturday night, which was opening day, and then my dad and I would wait a few hours and start the 5-hour drive from southeastern Wisconsin that would go straight to the woods and unpack our stuff at the cabin later. So I slept most of the way up there and woke up because we were driving in the woods and going over a lot of bumps. It was probably 5:30 a.m. at this point, so it's still very dark, and my dad tells me that he thinks we made a wrong turn at some point in the woods. He was going to keep on going along this very poor excuse for a road, more like a trail. Lots of branches scraping around the truck and thudding as they smacked the sides. I'm looking out the side window when my dad screams, "What the hell?" I look up and we're face to face with another pickup truck about 30 feet away. Keep in mind that it's basically pitch black. The truck is sitting there with no lights on, only illuminated by our lights. I looked closer and realized there are 2 really grisly looking guys sitting in the truck staring at us, and they look furious. After seeing them, I noticed on the ground between our 2 trucks was a deer body with no head, and the body was completely skinned, but all the meat left intact. My father threw it in reverse and got the hell out of there. He figured out where we were and realized that we were only about a mile away from where we were to hunt. That day we waited until it was just about light out to walk out of our strands. I realized the guys were probably poachers, only killing for the rack and the fur, but just imagine that scene in the pitch black of the woods. Number 2. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I am a night person and was leaving kind of late for the drive, but was expecting to get in at around midnight, being that I would be living on my own after school. I was feeling a bit sentimental, as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. Home was somewhere else now. So it's sunset as I'm driving towards the highway, and there's a beautiful low fog in the fields along the roads catching the light. I decide around then that it would be nice to try for a more scenic back road until the typical turnpike stuff. So I decided to cut off towards West Virginia. I stop at a diner, get gas, and then proceed towards the WV line as night falls, as it is the last human contact I will make for the rest of the drive. I didn't foresee it, but an immense, dense fog dropped over Appalachia that night, slowing my drive considerably. At some point in the mountains, there was scarcely 10 or 15 feet of visibility. But there are some small towns that the roads lead me through. It's Friday night though, and it begins to feel oddly dead in each town I pass through. It'd be 9 or 10 p.m, and the local bars would look closed. There were no lights on in any of the houses. It felt uneasy, but maybe that's just how it is there. Anyway, I'm making terribly slow progress with the fog and the back roads at night. Deer sightings keep me on foot a little when the fog wasn't so bad, but at some point I'd have to noose my way through the foggy intersections, unsure if I'd find the other side. It was almost impassably dense at times, and the trip would take double the estimated time to arrive because of it. I'm often driving at around 25 miles per hour, or worse, trying to be safe. It's around 1 or 2 a.m, and there's no cell phone service as I get into a large national forest. There's no traffic around, so I decide to pull over to pee, leaving the engine on for whatever reason. It'd be a quick stop. I'm not fearless by any means, but I try to not let myself get too jumpy in the woods at night. But as I'm coming around the corner undoing my belt, I hear voices 40 or 50 yards into the forest, and then they're scrambling through the dead leaves and brush coming in my direction. It's pitch black, and I can't see anything off the road beyond the red glow of the taillights. Feeling sufficiently freaked out, and not willing to find out more, I bolt back to the driver's side and floor it to the next hill, happy I'd left the car on anyway. My heart is pounding. I never found out more about this little scare, and I'm glad for that. A little while longer, and I'm heading up some steep mounting and nearing an old firewatch tower from World War II. There's a plaque about it being a community morale builder, to have built it even if it didn't affect the war in any way. I pulled into the overlook to actually pee, because I never got the chance earlier. Now that I'm atop a sizable mountain, I suddenly get good service, and a string of concerned texts from my mum, freaking out and asking if I made it okay. By this point I should have been at my house hours ago, but I took such a long and unfamiliar way in the dark and intense mist. Knowing that she wouldn't go to sleep until I'm there, I respond that I'm safely home, hoping that it will end it. She immediately calls me and asks me where I am, and I can't really ignore her call, having just messaged her. I tell her that I'm home, and she asks, "In Virginia?" And I say, "Yeah, I'm in my college town," despite being at the top of a mountain in a forest in West Virginia. She sounds deeply unsettled, and said that she'd been trying to call me repeatedly, even though I had no service. I ask why, and she says that she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia, but way west of where you should have been, which is actually where I was. She said she got this phone call from a gruff young man with a backward-sounding voice, who was telling her that he needed to speak with me, and swearing at her, saying all these nasty things. She said she heard people in the background screaming, and people laughing. She hung up, and called me a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. She typed the number in on Google, and saw it was from West Virginia. I knew I was at least passing through a small part of it, and called the number back. A small child answered, and swore at her, and the earlier voices ripped the phone back and started saying my name again, and saying that he needed to speak with me. This was especially strange, because I was driving my dad's car, and I'm not registered to it, and even if they somewhere saw my plates and could run them, they'd get his name. I think I even paid with cash at the diner at the gas station on the way back, not to mention the fact that it was in another state. I can't think of anything I could have dropped with my name on it when I'd stepped out of the car briefly earlier, during the recent incident. I still had all my cards on me and my ID. It would have been an incredibly strange coincidence, or extremely elaborate prank either way. I do my best to reassure my mum, and I have no idea what that could be about, and that it just must be a weird coincidence. I tell her I'm at my house and that I'm okay, despite how troubling I find all of this in reality. She gives me a half-hearted okay, and we say goodnight. I pull out of the watchtower, pull off, and continue on to Virginia. Never have I been so comforted by the 3 a.m. dregs of late-night parties, students stumbling home at near university towns off a highway. I know well from my usual route. I carry on to that highway and make it safe easy, and things have been completely normal since. But I have never brought it up with my mum again, nor the heart to tell her where I was driving that night, or how late, or the voices in the woods. There's no climax and no resolution. I'm just trying to forget. Number 3. My sister worked an hour and a half away from my mother's, where she was staying temporarily at the time, which was bad, because she has a bad habit of falling asleep in cars. So, one night that she was working really late, I made her promise to call me, and I'd stay up to talk to her until she got home. One night, late, I'm on the phone with her, and out of nowhere she starts screaming. She finally gets out some semblance of a sentence, telling me that there was a girl covered in blood crawling out of a ditch onto the road. She pulls the car back around and jumps out the car and runs to her, the phone falling to the ground. I am still listening, and I hear the girl start sobbing and telling her, "Oh God, not you. I need help. They're coming back. They're going to come back for me." My sister at this point thinks the girl might have some mental issue because of how frantic and disconnected her thoughts are, and because she keeps saying she needs help. She doesn't seem to think that my sister could help her. Although in hindsight, I think the girl saw a 5'7", 100-pound sister with her high-pitched voice and thought that they could kill her too. From there, besides screaming and broken glass, I can only tell it from her side. She sees this truck pulling up, and it's about to wave them down, when the girl goes crazy and starts crawling and pleading with my sister to run. The truck puts on its brights, and 2 very big men jump out of the car and start walking towards them, making clicking, catcalling sounds, and my sister's blood turns cold. She reaches over and grabs the girl, as there's no way in hell she's leaving her, and in a whirlwind, manages to force her into the car, and jump in herself before the men reach it, smashing her lights. She speeds off, clipping one of them, and is followed by this truck trying to run her off the road for about half an hour. They only pull away when she reaches a hospital. Inside, the girl was in a panic and wouldn't let my sister leave her with the doctors. She kept saying she was her best friend and repeated her name over and over. From the doctors, my sister learned that this girl was repeatedly raped and then tied up and drugged behind the truck. To add to all the creepiness, once my sister got home, she looked at her name tag and remembered that she'd left hers at home and had to borrow an ex-employee's tag, Stephanie. And yet, despite my sister saying she didn't recall ever not fearing for her life enough to get to formalities and exchange names, the girl had called her by her real name. In the late 90s, I took a day trip over Naples, Florida, with a friend of mine who was interviewing with their fire department and asked me if I would accompany him. We had been traveling down Alligator Alley for several hours when we passed what appeared to be 7 dozen white shirts hanging in the cypress trees on the opposite side of the road. Intrigued by this, we made note of their location, and on our return trip later that afternoon, made a point to pull over and take a closer look. It was pretty weird. Someone had taken about 30 identical white pressed dress shirts and hung them at various heights throughout the cypress tree, which was standing in at least 4 feet of stagnant swamp water. The shirts were being held up in the trees by some kind of makeshift hanger composed of sticks, rather giving it a Blair Witch feel. While a few of the shirts had picked up some dirt, it was clear that at some point they had become bleached white and starched thoroughly. At one point my friend tossed a rock at it, and it bounced off with a large thud. We stood there looking at this display with the growing sense of unease, wondering what it meant and who had taken the trouble to travel out into the middle of nowhere to wade into several feet of gator-infested water to hang shirts in trees. In the evening light, it looked even creepier. Between the eeriness factor and the mosquitoes, we decided to return to the car and drove off, discussing our findings. We decided it was perhaps some kind of memorial to someone killed on the road, or perhaps something more sinister, like a ritual of some sort. Through the years, I have read other reports of similar displays being sighted on other remote roadways throughout the country. A few years ago, I happened to be travelling on Alligator Alley again, and did not notice the display. I wish I had been able to get a picture of it. Number 5. Once my friends and I were driving back from the nearest decent-sized city to our crappy little hometown in rural Tennessee. Now, I had an old car, but it was in fairly good shape. No real issues aside from some carburetor problems occasionally. There were probably 4 or 5 of us in the car. One of my friends had recently read some novel where a character says, "Well, Jesus, Buddha, and a bag of chips." Being wise-ass teenagers, we thought this was hilarious for some reason. We kept coming up with various combinations of blasphemous words in the same vein as the original. After a few minutes of this, all the lights in the car just cut off, inside and out. Nothing else was affected, just the lights. Then, just as suddenly, they came back on. Obviously, we chalked it up to chance. I had never had that happen to my car before, but it's not something that can be reasonably explained. After a few minutes of nervous laughter, the blasphemy resumed. Again the light shuts off, and now I was worried. I thought something was really wrong with my car. My friends accused me of turning off the lights. I hadn't, and convinced them of it. Again the lights came back on. Now, I'm an atheist currently, and at the time was a pretty cynical Christian. I didn't put much faith in the thought that our banter was pissing off God, so he was trying to send a message. But still, sometimes you don't tempt faith, right? Well, then you aren't me. Much to the dismay of my friends, I decided to give it one more try. I don't remember the exact phrase, but let's assume it was something that you wouldn't say to your grandmother. No sooner had the last syllable rolled off my tongue, all the lights cut out for good. This time long enough to force me to pull over and turn my car back on. We all sat silently pondering what had just happened. One of my more religious friends said a little prayer in the back seat. I kept my cynical mouth shut this time. Eventually I started the car, and the lights came on as normal. We rode the rest of the way home in silence. I never had a problem with the electrical in the car again after that night. The battery even lasted a couple of more years until I sold it. Number 6. When I was 19, my best friend and I, he's a guy, I'm a girl, road tripped around the coast for a few weeks of the summer. When we hit Humboldt, we set up camp in a state park, then decided to cruise back to town to get some pizza and see if we could spot anyone that looked like they would sell us some bud. After dinner, finding out no one was selling anything and feeling like dogs, we started driving back and, on an exit ramp, spotted a woman with her thumb out. She was so nondescript, it was impossible to read her. Somewhere between the ages of 25 to 35, straight brown hair, brown pants, and a plain blue sweater. Possibly because we were bummed out the afternoon was ending without any memorable pot-buying shenanigans, we picked her up. She said her name was Trish. She had these very hollow eyes and she spoke very quietly. She carried a small brown leather suitcase. She asked where we were going. We told her, and we asked her where she was heading. She said, "Oh, I think I'll get a ride into the park with you. I won't sleep in your tent or anything," she assured us. We had had a 2-person tent, and obviously didn't want a stranger in with us. We couldn't offer that. It was awkward. We had leftover pizza in the back seat, and told her to help herself. She ate it all quickly and quietly, like she hadn't eaten all day. We get to the campsite, awkward, and she asks what time we're leaving in the morning. So we tell her 10. She nods and says that she will see us then, turns and walks into the woods and disappears. We go to bed. No idea where she is or if she's coming back. In the morning, she appears minutes after we get up and start moving around, making oatmeal on the camp stove, and she does not look like she spent her sleepless nights in the woods. She looks exactly the same, not a hair out of place. Not even a pine needle stuck to her sweater. She observes our oatmeal, then disappears again, and returns shortly with 2 hands full of blackberries. This is a crowded campsite, and the blackberry bushes are picked clean. My friend and I spent a good half hour foraging the day before, and found 3 berries total. We put the berries in the oatmeal, and we all eat. We pack up, get in the car, and ask her where she wants to be dropped off. She tells us to take her back to the very spot we picked her up. It's not the direction we're going, but it's not that far. She looks very sad, and she thanks us. She gets out, we wish her well, and she says something like, "I doubt it." There was something spooky about the whole thing, but more than that, it was just really sad. I do wonder what happened to her. Number 7. I used to live way out in the middle of nowhere with my aunt and cousins for about 5 years. It can get pretty creepy at night. The town we were closest to only had a pre-K through, 12th grade school, post office, church, a tag agency and notary. We lived about 6 or 7 miles away, and we went to school there. Most of the homes are miles apart. We didn't even have bus stops. Each student was picked up from their house, and parents whose children rode the bus had to pay a fee for gas, because my bus rides lasted as long as 3 hours every day. That's how rural the area is, covered in woods and rivers, and there's a lot of wildlife. There had been a wildlife burning in a neighbouring county for the past couple of days, destroying acres of forest, forcing wildlife to flee. We had been extra cautious when driving, because deer were everywhere, and you couldn't drive long without seeing one. It wasn't uncommon to spot fellow motorists stranded after a deer incident. There was almost always blood-spattered trucks sitting at gas stations. My cousin and I were going home. We were using her truck to help a friend move a pool table, and we ended up staying and playing pool until a little before 4. We hadn't been drinking or anything, just hanging out, and we were driving down this old dirt road. Over the trees and in the distance, we could see smoke from the burning wildfire against the night sky. A big buck ran out in front of us, causing my cousin to hit the brakes. Then something much bigger ran out after it and grabbed the deer. It happened so fast my eyes were locked on the buck, and I didn't get a good look at whatever it was. We hit the arse end of it, and whatever it was went spinning. The truck crashed into a small ditch on the side of the road, sending dust everywhere. It wasn't serious and neither of us were hurt, but it knocked the battery cables loose. We pulled out our cell phones, but of course no signal, and we weren't surprised. Neither of us mentioned we were hit, and we got out in an attempt to open the hood, but we couldn't reach the front to unlock it, because the front of the truck was wedged against dirt and sitting angled downhill. There wasn't much we could do, so we walked up the road searching for a signal and using our phones as flashlights. Then we saw the deer laying beside the road. It had been gutted. There was a huge ragged hole on its belly, and its intestines were strung out for a few feet in the directions of the woods. This was a very large deer, and we immediately decided that we weren't going to be a part of this. We got back in the truck and waited for a passing car. I rationalized that we must have hit the deer or something, but she knew we didn't. We hit something else. We got lucky, and after about only 10 minutes, we see some headlights. It could take hours for another car to pass, but on these back roads, as soon as they get close, we flagged down the driver and told him what happened. He told us that he was heading out for an early morning hunting trip. He wasn't in a rush and offered to try and pull out our truck, and followed us, showing a big dent he had from when he hit a deer a few days earlier, which started a conversation about all our wildlife animal refugees. We told him about the deer and asked him if he knew which kind of animal could do that, and he decided to take a look. We walked him to where it was, but it wasn't in the same place, and it wasn't a whole deer anymore. It had been ripped to shreds. Most of its bones were intact, with strips of flesh still attached. It was a horrifying sight, mangled and bent in odd and unsettling ways. He said, "Holy shit, that's a 12-point buck." We asked if he thought a mountain lion could do that kind of damage in 10 minutes, and he just replied, "Maybe," very unconvincingly, and suggested giving us a ride home and coming back for the truck when it's light out. He gave us his number to help him pull the truck out later that day, but we had our uncles do it. We didn't want to bother him anymore. There was a bunch of black fur stuck to the grill but no blood. Our uncles brushed it off as an overreaction, but they never saw the deer. When I tell people this story, they're convinced it was a skinwalker. Number 8. My girlfriend and I were going on a backpacking trip in NorCal. She had worked that afternoon until 5, so we didn't hit the back roads to the mountains off the highway until just before dark. The route we took was plenty familiar, and we went through a nice country area. This was our second trip to the same place, only the first time we came there happened to be during an OHV competition, so the place was really populated. This time, it was not, and my girlfriend joked about this movie where a serial killer cleaned out of town and just kind of played shop after killing everyone. Of course, then she falls asleep, leaving me and my dog awake. The whole drive through the town, and then the farmlands, went by without meeting a single person. When we finally started our descent of the unmaintained mountain access road, I get that nagging feeling that someone's there, and that you just can't see them. So I turn on the CB to hear any traffic nearby, from campers or night trail drivers, and get nothing. Now this truck is 22 years old, and it has some issues now and then, but 2 hours into the mountain, the pitch black of the cab gets interrupted by a bright orange check engine light, which goes off a minute later. It's now dark enough that I turn on the overhead power lights to give myself more comfort of our surroundings. Just then, the CB squealed out the worst static ever, and I jumped to turn it off, looking back up at this big-ass deer now standing in the road, as I had to slam on the brakes, stalling the truck and bringing back the check engine light. Now it's dark, the truck's off, and the check engine light is on, and the damn dog starts whining. I try to key the engine whines, but no start. I sit there and wait a while, and hallelujah, it worked. When we got to the trailhead, surprisingly we found around 10 cars parked, which is a lot more than comfort permits, especially so far out alone. And when I get out of the cab, I notice a group of 8 sitting at an overlook. They turn to me, and one of them says, "Glad you made it out all right." I later realized that at the vantage point, made it so that they were able to watch the whole 3-hour drive, all while I sat in that cab feeling so damn alone. Sure helps you remember there's always someone who's watching, even if you think you're alone. Number 9. I was on my way home from a rather long trip with my mother. We got to a bridge where we saw an elderly woman in a nightgown. Think Grandma Death / Roberta Sparrow from Donnie Darko. It was fall, so rather cool, and the sun was already setting behind the trees. So the white nightgown really shone in the dark. She was just walking. Problem was that she was barefoot and completely clean, like nothing had touched her at all. We had been on this road before the bridge at least 10 miles, and we had another 15 before we got anything that even resembled civilization. It's the road and ample trees for miles and miles around. We stopped and asked her where she was going and if she was with anyone. She kept mumbling to herself, but I remember her eyes. Her eyes were wide, as if she'd seen something frightening. The whites of her eyes were bleached white, and the pupils were straight jet black. She never made eye contact with us, and just kept walking forward. We drove off and called the police. We both kept expecting her car or someone to be at the road ahead, but there was no one at all. Stuff like that doesn't happen at all there, so it was pretty startling to say the least. It was very plausible that it was dementia or something along those lines, but once more, walking on foot so many miles deep on this road is just unheard of. If anything, that scared us more. Number 10. In the mid-90s, I went on a road trip with my son, and for some stupid reason, decided to take a different route home than the one I had previously taken and that I was familiar with. I turned out of the new route, and it was a super desolate road. I specifically chose to drive in the middle of the night, so that my son would be sleeping and so that there would be less traffic. It's about 3 AM, and of course my POS car system breaks down. By some luck of the draw, I am almost right in front of an abandoned roadside market, and was able to coast into the parking lot. The windows are all boarded up on the market, steam is pouring out from under my hood, and it was essentially the start of every single dumb chick breaks down in the middle of nowhere and gets hacked to death movie that you've ever seen. All of a sudden, I hear headlights coming around the bend. I'd been driving on this road for a couple of hours, and had seen maybe 1 or 2 vehicles the entire time. A truck drives past, slows down, and then I see the reverse lights come on in my rearview mirror. Deliverance banjo music starts playing in my head. The truck pulls up, so our vehicles are driver window to driver window, and I see that the driver is an older man, and he's just staring at me. He looks like the stereotypical killer that you visualize. Long, scraggly grey hair, grizzled stubble, crazy sort of eyes. He motions for me to roll down the window. I'm trying to look anywhere but directly at him, and acting like I didn't see him and that everything's fine and dandy. Oh no, I'm not in distress. Please ignore the steam coming from my car. I'm good, thank you. He backs up a little, parks, and gets out of his truck, and starts walking towards my car. I'm thinking this is where my son and I end up as news stories about bodies being found in the boonies when the snow melts. And he starts yelling, "I'm not gonna hurt you. Roll down your window." I keep looking anywhere but at him, whilst trying to give off a strong "you don't want to mess with me" vibes, when in reality I'm shitting my pants. He gives me a disgusted look, walks to his truck, and starts digging around. He comes back with tools in his hands, and now I'm thinking, oh my god, he's got tools, he's going to kill me and bust my teeth out and cut my fingers off, so that I can't be identified. He yells, "Open the hood!" I'm looking everywhere but at him. Open the hood! Let me see what's wrong! He's pissed. I'm scared shitless, but I reach down and pop the hood. He opens it, and I crouch down so that I can see him through the couple of inches where the hood is open. He looks up, and we make eye contact, and I'm about to die. He looks down and keeps doing what he's doing. He goes back and forth between his truck and my car a couple more times, bringing more tools, some jug of something, and other things that I can't make out. After about 15 minutes, he closes my hood and yells at me to start it up. My car sputters a little, turns over, and then seems fine. He yells, "Be careful, there are a lot of weirdos out there," gets in his truck, and gives me one last disgusted look and drives off. My car made it home. My dad looked it over, and after I told him the story, he deducted that the guy had changed my radiator hose. My dad pointed out many times that the chances of being struck by lightning were probably better than my chances of some random guy in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, happened to be driving around with a radiator hose and the tools to replace it for a whatever 10-plus-year-old POS foreign car that I had been driving. I'm so glad that he wasn't a serial killer, and I never even said thank you. Bonus story. I live about 130 miles from home in Aberdeen, Scotland, so I go back to Glasgow semi-regularly. This happened 3 months ago, and I haven't been home since. It was February night, and I was on my way home to see my family. The drive is unlit, on 70-mile-per-hour roads, so there I was doing 60, and a car just sort of appeared behind me as they do. I didn't think anything of it, so the car starts to get really close, like uncomfortably dangerously close. This is in the middle of nowhere, so I'm confused. They could have overtaken me if they wanted to. I started speeding up. I'm doing 75, and a car appears in front of me. They're doing around 60. I start slowing down, but the car behind me is way too close. The car in front of me brakes slowly, down to about 40. I pull out, overtake, and speed up. By this point my heart is racing, and I'm thinking it's probably Racer messing up with me. But this car won't move, and it's about 10 feet behind me. Its lights are filling my car, and I can barely see the road. I see a lay-by sign in 50 yards, so I decide to stop to let this maniac pass. I put in the lay-by, last minute, and the car flies by. The car brakes suddenly, almost skidding to a stop. I see it reversing back up the road towards me, and I turn my lights off. The car rolls up slowly next to me. It stops, window in line with mine, and I'm just sitting there with my eyes shut. I hear his door open and close. This huge figure gets out and slowly bends down to my level and chaps my window. I'm about to go into shock. I slowly roll down my window, visibly shaking, and I let out a gasp asking him what he wants. He replies, "I need about 350. Then he squashed his car and climbed back into his lock.